To viewers in North America and around the world, my name is Nkemi Fejika and these are our top stories. Several strong earthquakes shake parts of Hawaii after a volcanic eruption. Hundreds are forced to leave their homes. President Trump rallies his base at a meeting of the National Rifle Association, vowing they can keep their guns. Chemical weapons inspectors say they finished gathering samples at the site of an alleged chlorine attack in Syria. And the U.S. says it will end temporary protection status for around 60,000 Honduran immigrants by 2020. And ready for the launch, the first NASA mission that will probe beneath the surface of Mars prepares for liftoff. Hello and welcome to BBC News. In the last few hours, there have been more strong earthquakes in Hawaii following the eruption of one of the world's most active volcanoes, Mount Kilauea. 1,700 residents have been evacuated from areas most vulnerable to lava flows, ash and toxic gas. Federal emergency teams and the National Guard have been deployed to the south side of Hawaii's Big Island, where a state of emergency has been declared. Bill Hayton reports.
A roadblock, Hawaii style. This neighborhood is 24 miles from the crater of Mount Kilauea, but the ground cracked open on Thursday and molten lava poured out.
I smelt it and I ran to the corner, and that's when I ran into a military officer that told me that it's smoking, and I sure as heck enough take the turn, and one of my favorite streets at least was on fire.
Dozens of small earthquakes left cracks in the roads. Some residents described a feeling as if a giant snake was moving under the houses.
You could feel the heat coming from the ground. Yeah, there's heat coming up out of this. There's lava under there.
And that wasn't the only danger. The air was filled with potentially toxic fumes. As a result, the state governor ordered an evacuation. There was little time to gather possessions. Some escaped with what they could. Residents are now waiting to see when they'll be allowed home. Kilauea is spewing smoke from one of its side vents, but at the moment scientists don't believe there's a major risk of an explosive eruption. Lava's been flowing from the volcano crater and cracks on its slopes ever since it became active in 1983. But with earthquakes getting stronger, no one's relaxing just yet. Bill Hayton, BBC News.
Well, earlier I spoke to Darren Carlson, who is a morning radio presenter on the Big Island of Hawaii, and he told me that he was about 35 miles away from the volcano.
I'm in Hilo Town, and although that is far enough away from us so that we're out of harm's way, at the same time, we've been feeling some of those earthquakes that you were just earlier mentioning. In fact, we felt a pretty significant 6.9 magnitude earthquake about an hour and a half ago. So while it's in Leilani Estates, that's the area where the lava erupting is occurring, they're really dealing with the real reality of that situation, whereas we in Hilo and some of the outer parts of the island, we're feeling the effects, but not to the degree that those poor folks are. It's pretty crazy, and that video is just as jarring for us to watch as it is for you around the world to see.
I can imagine. So from where you are, can you see anything?
Actually, no. Where I'm at right now, I'm literally in Hilo Town. I couldn't see. I usually watch everything through my computer, but we do have units and folks that we send out that way to cover it and get some live updates and that sort of thing. But not where I'm at.
Does that mean that you don't need to worry? I mean, what if? Because I suppose these things are affected by wind direction, right?
Well, yeah, the sulfur dioxide is the big concern here, and there's been a lot of that. In fact, the Hawaii County Civil Defense has been saying, for folks that have breathing problems, asthma, older folks, young persons, to be careful of that. But we're not getting any of that, even with a strong wind. I don't think we'd probably get that in Hilo. We do have a phenomenon called VOG, which is volcanic fog, basically, that we deal with on a sort of regular basis, but it's still pretty much kept down in that what we call the Puna area, if you will.
I suppose you guys are kind of used to volcanoes and earthquakes in Hawaii, but I mean, just to an outsider like me, I'm still I'm looking at this thing with my jaw open. I mean, I wonder what you guys are feeling.
Well, you know, we do get a lot of calls from our friends and family that may live on the mainland going, "Are you guys okay?" And it is dramatic, but I think you're right, though. In a certain way, sadly, we are kind of getting accustomed to it. We had, about 4 years ago, we had a lava flow that almost ran over the town of Pahoa, which is right nearby Leilani Estates, where that area is at. And that was a big relief when that lava stopped right at the foot of town. But yeah, hurricanes, lava flows, it's sort of our reality now.
Yeah, you kind of wonder why anyone would live in Hawaii, and then you see the pictures and you realize it's so beautiful, so, you know, who can blame you? But are you guys, well, this is the thing that actually got me thinking. There are some people who are not leaving, who've been asked to evacuate and are not leaving. That is nuts, isn't it?
And it is crazy. And the civil defense actually had put out a report saying, hey, if you're going to go in there and stay in your house, we probably won't be able to get to you. It won't be safe for us to get in because, as you saw in that previous video, too, the lava is you know, 150 feet high. And, you know, some people just, you can't tell them what to do. But by and large, most of the residents seem to be abiding by the law and going to the different places, shelters that they're keeping for folks that are being evacuated.
Just to ask you a bit about the earthquake, because obviously you have the volcano, which is happening in a different part of the island, so you're not quite affected. But the earthquake, you feel that.
Oh, yeah. Oh, it was, the last one we felt was a 6.9, and then we had, I think it was a 4.2, I want to say, before that. But that second one, it felt like it went for about 30 seconds, to the point where afterwards you weren't sure if you were feeling dizzy or not, because it really went for quite a while. Yeah, we felt that. It was the biggest one we felt since this all began.
And that was Darren Carlson. President Trump has vowed to defend the rights of Americans to own guns in a speech at the National Rifle Association's convention in Dallas, Texas. He was back among his core supporters after what has been a tumultuous week in which he's faced growing scrutiny about his alleged affair with Stormy Daniels, who's an adult film star. At the convention, he seemed to dismiss the idea of tighter gun control laws after February's mass shooting at a high school in Florida. Gary O'Donoghue sent this report from Dallas.
There he is. There's Donald J. Trump.
Traveling to the NRA's convention is becoming an annual pilgrimage for President Trump, but recent mass shootings have put the organization on the back foot. Though today, the president remains staunch in his defense of them and their right constitutionally to own a gun.
Your Second Amendment rights are under siege, but they will never, ever be under siege as long as I'm your president.
But after the shooting of 17 students and teachers at the school in Parkland, Florida on Valentine's Day, the mood has changed, with young people around the country keeping gun control at the forefront of the debate.
My daughter has no voice. She was murdered last week.
Shortly after that shooting, the president seemed prepared to stand up to the organization, though little action followed.
So let's talk about guns, shall we?
But there was no such tough talk for the NRA today. The president also suggesting that just having tight gun laws like those in London didn't stop people being killed in other ways, even though Britain's murder rate is a fraction of that in the United States.
I recently read a story that in London, which has unbelievably tough gun laws, a once very prestigious hospital, right in the middle, is like a war zone for horrible stabbing wounds. Yes, that's right. They don't have guns. They have knives.
Lindsay Falcon was one of those close by urging tighter controls. Her nephew, Joe R. Perez, was one of 4 people killed in a Waffle House shooting in Tennessee last month.
Please stop calling us stupid, you know, for wanting to protect our children.
This was an uncompromising speech by the president, and in a year where there are congressional elections, there's unlikely to be any more compromise by Republicans. Gary O'Donoghue, BBC News, Dallas.
Let's take a look at some of the other stories making the news. Donald Trump and the South Korean President Moon Jae-in will hold talks at the White House on May the 22nd. They're due to discuss the planned summit between Mr. Trump and the North Korean leader Kim Jong-un, which is expected to take place in late May or June. Earlier, President Trump said the time and place for the summit had been set, but gave no further details. Hundreds of Palestinians have been demonstrating along the border fence with Israel for the 6th consecutive Friday. At least 44 protesters have been killed during the weeks of protests, marking 70 years since the Palestinian Arabs were expelled or fled when the new state of Israel was created. Israel says it uses force to prevent damage to the fence or possible infiltrations. Also, Israel has withdrawn its candidacy for its first ever seat on the UN Security Council. Elections will be held next month to appoint 5 new members to serve a 2-year term starting in January. Israel's mission at the UN said it had decided to postpone its candidacy after consulting with partners and friends. The former U.S. President George H.W. Bush has been discharged from a hospital in the Texan city of Houston, where he'd stayed for nearly 2 weeks. He was admitted just a day after the funeral of his wife, Barbara. The 93-year-old was being treated for an infection that spread to his blood. Chemical weapons inspectors say they finished gathering samples at the site of an alleged chlorine attack in Syria. The team spent almost 2 weeks in the city of Douma. Syria's President Bashar al-Assad denies using the banned weapons. You may find some of the images in this report by Andrew Plant distressing.
An announcement on state TV by the Russian military, close allies of the Syrian government, as the international community waits for the results of tests from the site of an alleged chemical weapons attack.
During their work, the experts visited 2 apartments where toxic substances were allegedly used and took samples. They also visited a laboratory as well as a warehouse for chemical substances. We are now waiting for their report.
These pictures are from the 7th of April. They were filmed by a Syrian opposition group and they claim to show the aftermath of the attack. People having chlorine washed from their skin. Days afterwards, America and France said that they had proof the Syrian government had used a chemical weapon, and they, with the UK, launched more than 100 cruise missiles at, they said, key targets in Syria's chemical weapons programme. This is where the alleged attack happened, 16 kilometres outside the capital Damascus, the city of Douma, in a former rebel-held area of the country. It's thought the chemical weapons inspectors have collected dozens of environmental samples and are seeking to collect biological tissue from the bodies of victims. Analysing the samples could take a month. Russia has claimed the attack was faked by opposition groups. The Syrian regime has been suspected several times of using prohibited weapons, something it has repeatedly denied. The chemical weapons inspectors say it could be several weeks before their results are made public. Andrew Plant, BBC News.
Stay with us on BBC News because still to come, dressing down, why the kimono is falling out of favour in Japan and why some are trying to revive it. This is BBC News and these are the latest headlines. Several strong earthquakes shake parts of Hawaii after the eruption of one of the world's most active volcanoes, Mount Kilauea. And President Trump has told members of America's powerful gun lobby, the National Rifle Association, that he won't bow to calls for stricter gun controls. Dust storms whipped up by violent winds have destroyed homes and lives across a wide area of northern India. At least 125 people have been killed, though some reports suggest the figure is higher as buildings collapsed in the intense storm. Villages in Agra near the Taj Mahal were the worst affected and more bad weather is on the way. The BBC's Salman Ravi reports from Agra.
It's now calm in Badhira village. A miracle that more lives weren't lost. This is the place where I'm standing here. You can see this house. It's in a rubble now. The family used to live here and none of them are alive. And the local villagers, they had to perform the last rites. The women are in mourning and know it will be hard to rebuild.
Suddenly, all the people were caught up in it. People say its speed was 150 kilometers per hour. It was a disaster. We helped one another. 3 people died in our village.
We were inside our house when it collapsed with the high winds. My father was killed. My niece and I were injured.
Nobody has ever seen such a hurricane. We pray to God that we don't experience this again. All the farmers' crops have been ruined.
I was hiding behind the furniture in the room. The wind blew our wall down and I was stuck in the ruins with my whole family.
The villagers say they should have had more notice, but government officials say the storm came out of nowhere. It was the worst in 20 years. And more bad weather is forecast. Salman Ravi, BBC News, Agra.
A former suspect in the murder of Stephen Lawrence, who is one of Britain's most wanted fugitives, has been arrested in Spain. The 41-year-old from South London is suspected to have been behind the large-scale supply of drugs. Andy Moore reports.
Pictured shortly after his arrest, not looking too happy, Jamie Acord was on the list of Britain's most wanted suspects living in Spain. He was captured by armed officers from the Spanish National Police as he was leaving a gym near the Sagrada Familia Cathedral in Barcelona. His arrest comes soon after the 25th anniversary of the murder of the teenager Stephen Lawrence. He was attacked by 5 men at a bus stop in southeast London in a racially motivated killing. This was Acord in 1998, spitting at protesters as he left the Stephen Lawrence inquiry. He always denied any involvement in the stabbing. He was never charged. His arrest in Spain was in connection with the alleged large-scale supply of drugs. He'd last been seen in Eltham in London 2 years ago. Ian Cruxton from the National Crime Agency said Acord thought he could evade capture, but as a result of an intelligence-led operation, his days on the run have ended. We will never stop pursuing these individuals. Acord is due to appear before a court in Madrid next week for an extradition hearing. Andy Moore, BBC News.
The US government says it will end its so-called temporary protection status for around 60,000 Honduran immigrants by 2020. Tougher US immigration policies have targeted migrants from Honduras and elsewhere in Latin America at its border with Mexico. But Honduras insists that it will simply be unable to cope with repatriating so many people. Russell Trott reports.
Those Honduran migrants waiting at the border to cross into the United States greeted the Trump administration's decision with regret and disbelief. America's temporary protection for some immigrants is finally coming to an end.
Don't get rid of this law. Hopefully it weighs on the United States President's heart that we are all humans. Hondurans have helped the United States grow. Gringos are intelligent, but they are not hard-working like Hondurans.
Human rights groups and the government of Honduras say the country won't be able to cope with the repatriation of tens of thousands of people. Free legal support has been pledged for up to 60,000 who could be vulnerable to deportation. After El Salvador, Hondurans are the second largest nationality to lose their temporary protected status.
The 57,000 Hondurans that Trump wants to kick out of the U.S. are potentially going back to a country that today is significantly more dangerous for women, for indigenous, for LGBTQ, and for other minorities than it was at the time that they first left and got temporary protective status. We should need to say no more than that they are members of our community and they are under attack.
Another crime scene in one of the world's most dangerous places, and one reason why thousands seek sanctuary in the United States. Many are fleeing violence and poverty and looking for a better life, but Washington says conditions had improved in Honduras and immigrants now have 18 months to apply for legal status or go home. Russell Trott, BBC News.
NASA's first lander mission to Mars since 2012 is due to launch on Saturday morning from Vandenberg Air Base in California. It will probe beneath the red planet's surface for the first time to uncover the secrets of how it and other rocky planets formed. Victoria Gill has this explanation.
A mission to the red planet and a journey back in time. Probing beneath the surface of Mars, NASA's InSight mission will aim to take the pulse of this planet, to work out how it formed more than 4.5 billion years ago. Once it's unfolded its vital solar panels, the robotic lander will carefully put down its own scientific instruments, which will map the deep structure of the planet. These will take the temperature of Mars and analyze the structure of its core. One instrument, a seismometer, will pick up signals from Martian earthquakes or Marsquakes.
Unlike previous missions, the most recent missions have been looking for water and habitability. This particular one is looking at how the planet itself is made up, how it's built.
Earth and Mars formed at the same time, probably by similar processes, so this mission could also shed light on why the two planets are so different.
Mars formed about the same time, a little bit further out than us, from roughly similar materials, but it's very different. It's now dead. It could have been alive 3.8 billion years ago. So we want to know why the similarities, why the differences, and particularly why Mars has ended up with not being a habitable place now.
Beyond a trip to Mars, scientists say this is a mission to our solar system's past. Peering beneath Mars' surface could also help us understand how Earth, the Moon, and even distant exoplanets around other stars evolved. Victoria Gill, BBC News.
Let's head to Japan now and the attempts to revitalize an ancient tradition. For centuries, the kimono has been a symbol of the nation, but sales are in decline and the market is shrinking. It seems the kimono is too expensive for everyday use, but some people are trying to change that, as the BBC's Tim Allman reports.
Yuichi Hirose is a master craftsman. His work is detailed, meticulous, using techniques that date back to the 17th century. But he knows this is an industry that desperately needs to move with the times.
The kimono has become something that is very far removed from our daily lives, and very few people wear them on a daily basis.
40 years ago, sales of the kimono were worth around $17 billion a year. By 2016, that figure had fallen to less than $3 billion. Expensive to make, difficult to wear, almost impossible to clean. Companies are now trying to use cheaper materials like cotton, wool, or even polyester. Their aim? To create kimonos that are both affordable and wearable.
We need to make kimonos which are really part of people's wardrobe, an outfit in which they can express themselves.
And there are high hopes tourism might boost sales, particularly with the Tokyo Olympics only 2 years away. Ancient and modern, traditional dress revolutionized for the 21st century. Tim Allman, BBC News.
More details have been released about the wedding of Prince Harry and Meghan Markle on the 19th of May in Windsor. Meghan Markle's father will walk his daughter down the aisle at St George's Chapel. Both Ms Markle's parents will arrive in the UK a week before the ceremony to meet members of the royal family. Now, this is just a reminder that of our top story, which is that several strong earthquakes have hit parts of Hawaii following eruptions of one of the world's most active volcanoes, Mount Kilauea. Also, 1,700 residents have been evacuated and the state of emergency declared in that part of Hawaii. Chemical weapons inspectors say they have finished gathering samples from Douma, the site of an alleged chlorine attack in Syria last month. It's expected the analysis will take several weeks. And if you want any more on the stories that we are covering, just go to our website and find plenty of analysis there from our correspondents and experts. You can find it at bbc.com/news. Or you can just download the app. Bye-bye.